Okay, in this video, we are going to take a look at Singer's Famine, Affluence, and Morality and start mapping it. You might want an electronic version of the text for copying and pasting purposes. It's not hard to find one. Just Google Singer, Famine, Affluence, and Morality, and the first link is to the same version of the paper that we're using, and it's easy to copy and paste. Okay, so the first 4 paragraphs of this paper are an introduction. In the first paragraph, we get some basic facts. And indeed, the beginning of the second paragraph says, these are the essential facts about the present situation in Bengal. So we start with some facts about a situation in Bengal, or present-day Bangladesh. What are those facts? People are dying from lack of food, shelter, and medical care. That's important. The other important facts are that this suffering and death are not inevitable, and we can prevent this kind of suffering, and yet we have not made the necessary decisions to do so, not at the individual level and not at the government level, which is what a lot of this is about. Okay, so those are the facts. Bad things are happening. We could do something about it, but we're not. Those, so far, facts. Now, important point. We started with a specific case, but he says there's nothing unique about this situation except its magnitude, and it's just the latest, at least as of 1972, and most acute series of emergencies that raises this kind of question. As Singer notes, there are also many parts of the world where the same issues are a concern independent of any special emergency. So one thing you might ask is, this is in 1972, what is the situation in 2019 with respect to lack of shelter, food, medical care? So Bengal is just an example, but we're more generally worried about death and suffering from lack of food, shelter, and medical care, and the possibility that we could do something about it and we're not. Okay, so paragraph 3 starts with, what are the moral implications of a situation like this? So in many argumentative papers, you'll find a guiding question explicitly stated. Even when you don't find the guiding question explicitly stated, there's usually a guiding question that's implicit in the whole project, the whole paper. What is the interesting, important question that this paper seeks to ask? What is the interesting and important question that people could disagree about, that there could be more than one answer to, such that it's worth writing this paper? A main claim, thesis, or conclusion is often the answer to a question or the solution to a problem. Now we've got some indicator language here. In what follows, I shall argue that whatever's coming after this is probably a main claim or conclusion. The way people in relatively affluent countries react to a situation like that in Bengal cannot be justified. Indeed, the whole way we look at moral issues, our moral conceptual scheme needs to be altered, and with it, the way of life that has come to be taken for granted in our society. Okay, so is this the main, this to me immediately seems like that's the main claim. And this seems like maybe an implication or an elaboration of the main, I'm not sure. So I'm just gonna copy and paste the whole thing. And now I'm gonna open up MindMup to start mapping this. I have MindMup connected to my Google Drive, so I just go to New, More, MindMup. I'm going to title it. And now it doesn't automatically open up an argument visualization, so I'm going to go to View, Start Argument Visualization. And I like to turn off these little labels, and you can do that right here. So I'm double clicking. You can also hit the space bar to make this editable. Okay, so now I've got the main claim essentially right here. Okay, so in arguing for this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, paper officially starts here. This is where the body of the paper starts. I begin with the assumption that, okay, that's a kind of indicator language. I begin with the assumption that suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care are bad. So an assumption is a premise that is unargued for. It's assumed rather than argued for. I think most people agree with this, blah, 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 blah. I will just take it. I shall not argue for this view, he explicitly says, and I will take it that this assumption is accepted. So if you're not on board at this point, you're not going to accept the rest of the argument. So I'm just going to add this as a component. And these, putting main claim here and premise here, aren't something we necessarily want in our final map, but since I'm just putting claims in boxes for now, I'm leaving little notes to myself. Another thing you could do is if you hover over once the little hand shows up, the pointer, and right click, it opens up a menu here. You could write in notes that this is an assumption or a premise or whatever. I'm going to close the sidebar here. But for now, I'm just going to leave little notes to myself. Okay, my next point is this. Here's more indicator language. What's coming next is a point, probably a premise in the argument. If it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening, qualification, without thereby sacrificing anything of moral comparable importance, we ought morally to do it. All right, I'm going to open another box. Pretty sure this is going to be a premise. And I'm going to label it, this is a principle. And if you didn't pick up that this is a principle on your own, you might have picked up on it later in this paragraph. So he states this principle, and now what's the next point? The point is to sort of clarify, what do you mean when you say without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance? By without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, I mean without causing anything else comparably bad to happen or doing something that's wrong in itself or failing to promote some moral. What's the point of this? So if you can prevent something bad from happening, but you'd have to, say, drive over a human being. Say you're on your way to rescue someone and you're in a truck, and the only way you're going to get there in time is if you run over somebody in the road. That would be causing something else comparably bad to happen. So yes, you should save someone if you can, but you can't do it if you have to like run something over. Or doing something that's wrong in and of itself. So maybe it's not even comparably bad, but even if you just had to do something that was wrong to achieve your end, that's perhaps ruled out. Or if the only way you can save that person, you fail to do some other really good, morally good thing, then maybe you ought to do that thing rather than save a person. So these are important qualifications. Okay. So this principle, so there he says, this is a principle. And he tells us it seems almost uncontroversial. And perhaps it does. And that's one of the things that he's emphasizing in his own paper, arguing for this, is just how actually how controversial this principle can be, because it actually has implications that conflict with what we believe and how we live in a pretty significant way. And so he is highlighting those things up front so that he can argue for his principle as best he can and as honestly as he can, right? Okay, so our point is we've got this principle, we've clarified what exactly the principle means. Then he goes on here to say that for what it's worth, we could qualify this even further. So if it is in our power to prevent something bad from happening, and here's the difference. Instead of without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, he's added without thereby sacrificing anything significant, morally significant in particular. Then we ought morally to do it. So I'm going to add this, and I'm going to put it in the same box, actually. I don't know why it won't let me write in this box. And I'm going to put this as an alternative version of the principle or premise. Okay. So one of these things. And then he gives us an application of the principle. So what is that application? If I'm walking past a shallow pond and see a child drowning in it, I ought to wade in and pull the child out. This will mean getting my clothes muddy, but this is insignificant, while the death of the child would presumably be a very bad thing. So in part, the function of this is just to illustrate the principle. Like, here's a case where the principle would apply, but he doesn't really spell out how exactly the principle applies. And we might ask, what is the significance of this case? Does the fact that the principle seems to apply in this case, and I'll discuss this more in a different video, does the fact that the principle applies in this case thereby support the principle? That's one thing we might examine. Or does this case just illustrate it? And what is the function of this case throughout the paper, because we do get reference back to it again? Are we getting an argument by analogy? Does this analogy do work throughout the argument? That's something we might talk about. But I'm going to pause on that for now and just return to mapping the argument as we have it so far. Okay, since space isn't really an issue here for the moment, I'm just going to move these up and out of the way, and I'm going to start afresh with my main claim. And one thing you might notice is if you open a box and then you're going to copy and paste to it the minute you leave the box, it's empty and it disappears. So you got to have your thing copy and paste it before you decide to do it. All right, I'm just going to copy the basic claim here. Maybe I'll end up changing my mind about how I phrase the main claim later, and then I'm going to add a reason. And I forgot that I should have that reason ready to go before I add it. And then I'm going to add the other reason, and I'm going to pick the qualified one. Even though Singer ultimately argues for the other one, this is perhaps the easier one to defend, and we just need to pick one. So let's pick that one. And I'm going to choose to make it a co-premise, but you could list it as an independent premise for now and then change your mind later and decide how these are related. Okay, so what have we got so far? We've got the main claim. The way people in relatively affluent countries react to a situation like that in Bengal cannot be justified. Why think that? 1, suffering and death from lack of food, shelter, and medical care are bad. 2, if it is in our power to prevent something very bad from happening without sacrificing anything morally significant, we ought morally to do it. Okay, how exactly do these support the main claim, and are we missing any implicit premises? Check out the next video to see where we go from here.